Marcus stared at the eviction notice taped to his apartment door, his hands trembling as he held his 3-year-old daughter Emma close to his chest. The red letters seemed to burn through his vision. Final notice. Pay or vacate in 72 hours. $20. That's all he had left in his wallet. Crumpled bills that represented the last barrier between his little girl and the street. The hallway smelled of mildew and desperation, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like dying fireflies. Emma's small fingers clutched his worn denim jacket, her innocent eyes wide with confusion as she sensed her father's fear. Marcus had worked double shifts at the warehouse for months, but when the company downsized, he became just another statistic. 3 weeks without income had drained his savings, maxed his credit cards, and now threatened to steal the only stability his daughter had ever known. He fumbled with his keys, metal scraping against metal in the silence that felt deafening. Inside their tiny one-bedroom apartment, cardboard boxes lined the walls like tombstones marking the death of their former life. Emma's toys were already packed away, her bright drawings from daycare folded carefully between layers of clothes that barely fit in 2 suitcases. The refrigerator hummed its lonely song, containing nothing but a half-empty bottle of milk and some crackers he'd been rationing for days. Marcus set Emma down gently, watching as she toddled toward her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, who sat abandoned on the bare mattress they'd been sharing since he sold her crib last month. The sight of her reaching for the only comfort she had left sent a knife through his chest. He'd failed her. Failed as a father, as a provider, as the man who was supposed to protect her from the world's cruelties. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from if you've ever felt like giving up was the only option left. The walk to the grocery store felt like a death march. Emma rode in the squeaky shopping cart, babbling happily about the colorful cereal boxes, while Marcus calculated and recalculated in his mind. $20 had to stretch into something resembling a meal plan until he could figure out their next move. Peanut butter, bread, bananas, and milk. Basic survival math for a father who once dreamed of giving his daughter everything. As they approached the checkout line, Emma suddenly pointed toward the store's entrance with excitement. "Daddy, look. Doggy." Marcus turned to see an elderly homeless man sitting cross-legged near the automatic doors, a weathered German shepherd mix lying loyally beside him. The man's cardboard sign read, "Veteran. Hungry. God bless." His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and Marcus could see the man's ribs through tears in his shirt. The sight should have been just another part of the urban landscape Marcus had grown numb to, but something about the man's eyes stopped him cold. They held the same desperate emptiness Marcus saw in his own mirror every morning, the same quiet acceptance of defeat that comes when the world has stripped away everything except the breath in your lungs. Marcus pushed the cart past a man, focusing on Emma's chatter about the nice doggy as they entered the store. But those eyes haunted him through every aisle. In the bread section, he found himself staring at a loaf of whole wheat, remembering how his own father used to say that real men take care of those who can't take care of themselves. In the produce area, Emma grabbed a banana from his carefully counted bunch and pretended to feed her stuffed elephant, her pure joy a stark contrast to the weight crushing his shoulders. The cashier was a teenage girl with kind eyes who smiled warmly at Emma while scanning their meager items. "She's beautiful," the girl said softly. "You're a good dad." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow because he knew they weren't true. A good dad wouldn't be counting pennies while his daughter faced homelessness. A good dad would have backup plans and emergency funds and family to call for help. If you believe real strength means sacrificing for others even when you have nothing left, hit subscribe now, because what Marcus does next will shock you. Marcus paid for the groceries with his $20, receiving $3.47 in change. As they walked toward the exit, the homeless man was still there, his dog now resting its head on his lap, while he stroked its fur with the gentle touch of someone who understood that love costs nothing but means everything. The man looked up as Marcus approached, not with expectation but with the weary resignation of someone accustomed to being invisible. "Sir," Marcus heard himself saying, his voice barely above a whisper. The man tilted his head, surprised to be addressed directly. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the $3.47, his hand shaking as he extended it toward the stranger. "I know it's not much, but—" The homeless man stared at the money for a long moment, then looked up at Marcus with recognition that transcended words. He could see the struggle in the younger man's face, the same desperation he knew intimately. "Son," he said in a voice rough with emotion and exposure, "you look like you need this more than I do." Marcus shook his head, pressing the bills and coins into the man's weathered palm. "No, sir. We'll be okay." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but something deep inside him knew this moment mattered more than his fear. Emma watched from the shopping cart, her wide eyes taking in this exchange between her father and the stranger. "What's your name, son?" the man asked, his fingers closing around the money with reverence, as if Marcus had just handed him gold instead of grocery store change. "Marcus, this is Emma." His daughter waved shyly from her perch in the cart. "I'm Henry," the man replied, his dog's tail beginning a slow wag at the mention of his owner's name. 23 years Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan. This here's Duke." He scratched behind the dog's ears, and Marcus could see the love flowing between them like a visible current. Something passed between the two men in that moment, an understanding that transcended their circumstances. Marcus had given a homeless veteran the last money to his name while facing eviction himself, but somehow it felt like the most logical thing he'd ever done. Henry's eyes filled with tears as he looked down at the crumpled bills. "Son, I want you to have something," Henry said, reaching into a worn military duffel bag beside him. He pulled out a small object wrapped in faded cloth. "This belonged to my grandfather. Been carrying for luck, but I think you need it more than me right now. What happens next will change everything you thought you knew about luck and destiny." Marcus unwrapped the cloth to reveal an antique coin, tarnished with age but bearing an inscription he could barely make out in the dim store lighting. Henry's weathered hands trembled as he spoke. "That there's a 1943 copper penny. My grandfather found it in France during World War II. Saved his life more than once. He always said, 'Maybe it'll bring you some of that same luck.'" Marcus tried to protest, but Henry held up a firm hand. "That coin's been waiting for the right person, and I believe that's you. Anyone willing to give their last penny to a stranger deserves whatever good fortune the universe has to offer." Henry's eyes held a clarity that seemed to pierce through the fog of Marcus's despair. Sometimes we have to plant seeds of kindness before we can harvest hope. The drive home was quiet except for Emma's sleepy murmurs about the nice doggy man. Marcus kept glancing at the penny sitting on his dashboard, its copper surface catching the streetlight in ways that seemed almost magical. He'd heard stories about rare coins being worth money, but such fairy tales belonged to other people's lives, not to single fathers counting change in grocery store parking lots. Back in their nearly empty apartment, Marcus tucked Emma into bed on their shared mattress, reading her favorite story about a little elephant who could fly. Her breathing grew deep and steady as sleep claimed her, and Marcus found himself alone with his thoughts and Henry's mysterious gift. He turned the penny over in his palm, studying the worn features and trying to make out the faded inscription around its edges. On impulse, he opened his laptop and typed 1943 copper penny value into the search engine. What appeared on his screen made him blink and refresh the page, certain he'd misread something. Articles about 1943 copper pennies selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars filled his browser window. His hands began to shake as he read story after story of ordinary people discovering these rare coins and having their lives transformed overnight. Comment miracle. If you believe some things happen for a reason. Most pennies from 1943 were made of steel due to wartime copper shortages, making the few copper versions incredibly rare and valuable. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he read authentication processes and auction results. One penny had sold for over $1 million, another for $600,000. The numbers seemed impossible, like hieroglyphs from a world he'd never imagined accessing. He studied Henry's penny under his desk lamp, comparing its features to the photographs online. The weight felt right. The color matched. The date was clear despite decades of wear. But Marcus forced himself to temper his growing excitement. False hope would be crueler than no hope at all, and he couldn't afford to dream of miracles while eviction loomed over Emma's head like a storm cloud. The next morning, Marcus called in every favor he could remember. His old college roommate Dave worked at a coin shop downtown and agreed to examine the penny during his lunch break. Marcus strapped Emma into her car seat, the precious coin wrapped carefully in Henry's cloth and tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Dave's coin shop occupied a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and a cell phone repair store, its windows filled with displays of currency from around the world. Dave emerged from behind the counter with a magnifying glass and electronic scale, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused intensity as he examined Henry's gift. "Marcus, where did you get this?" Dave's voice carried a tremor that made Marcus's stomach clench with anticipation. "A homeless veteran gave it to me yesterday. Said it was his grandfather's lucky penny from World War II. Marcus watched Dave's face for any sign of disappointment, any indication that hope was premature. Dave disappeared into a back room for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Emma entertained herself by pointing at colorful foreign bills while Marcus paced a small shop, his mind cycling through possibilities and fears in equal measure. When Dave finally returned, his expression was unreadable. "Marcus, I need you to sit down." Dave's tone was carefully measured, neither encouraging nor discouraging. "This penny is authentic. It's definitely a 1943 copper cent, and it's in remarkable condition considering its age." The words seemed to float in the air between them like soap bubbles that Marcus was afraid to touch. "What does that mean exactly?" "Share this with someone who needs to believe in miracles, because what Dave says next will restore your faith in humanity." Dave pulled out his laptop and showed Marcus' recent auction results. "Based on a conditioned provenance, I'd estimate this coin is worth somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000. Maybe more to the right collector." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "Marcus, this little piece of copper could change your life." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus gripped the edge of Dave's counter, his vision blurring as reality crashed over him like a tsunami. $400,000. $600,000. Numbers that represented safety for Emma, college funds, a real home with a backyard and stability, and all the dreams he'd buried under layers of survival and desperation. "Are you absolutely certain?" Marcus whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter this impossible moment. Dave nodded solemnly. "I've been dealing in rare coins for 15 years. This is the real deal. You'll want to get it authenticated by a major grading service and probably auction it through a reputable house. But Marcus, you and Emma are going to be okay. More than okay." The drive back to their apartment passed in a haze of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Marcus kept thinking about Henry sitting outside that grocery store, the man who'd given away a fortune to help a stranger, the veteran who'd carried this treasure for decades, waiting for the right moment to pass it along to someone who needed hope more than he needed wealth. Emma napped in her car seat while Marcus sat in their parking lot, staring at the eviction notice that now seemed as powerless as a paper tiger. He thought about calling his landlord, about the groceries he could buy, about the security deposit for a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. But mostly he thought about Henry and the inexplicable chain of events that had led to this moment. The authentication process took 3 weeks, during which Marcus borrowed money from Dave to pay the rent and keep them afloat. He visited Henry at the grocery store twice during that time, bringing sandwiches and dog food for Duke. Henry listened with quiet satisfaction as Marcus described the authentication process, nodding as if he'd known all along that the penny would prove genuine. "Sometimes the universe conspires to put the right people in the right place at the right time," Henry said during their second visit. "Your willingness to give when you had nothing told me everything I needed to know about your character." When the authentication result arrived, they exceeded even Dave's optimistic projections. The coin graded as fine 15, placing among the finest known examples of the 1943 copper cent. The auction house estimated it would sell for between $700,000 and $1 million. Before we finish this story, hit subscribe if you believe kindness always comes back tenfold. The auction took place on a rainy Tuesday evening at a prestigious numismatic house in the city. Marcus wore his one good suit, the same one he'd worn at job interviews and Emma's mother's funeral 2 years earlier. He held Emma on his lap as bidders from around the world participated by phone and internet, driving the price higher and higher until the auctioneer's gavel finally fell at $950,000. $950,000 for a penny that had been given to him by a homeless stranger who recognized something in Marcus's heart worth investing in. After fees and taxes, Marcus would net enough to buy a house, set up Emma's college fund, start a small business, and most importantly, never again feel the crushing weight of financial desperation. The first thing Marcus did with his newfound wealth was find Henry. The veteran had disappeared from his usual spot outside the grocery store, but Marcus spent days searching shelters and soup kitchens until he finally located him at a veterans outreach center across town. Henry's face lit up when he saw Marcus and Emma approaching, Duke's tail wagging with recognition. "I've been waiting for you," Henry said with a smile that transformed his weathered features. "I knew you'd come looking for me." Marcus tried to offer Henry half the proceeds from the auction, but the veteran refused to take more than enough money for a small apartment and basic needs. "That penny found its way to you for a reason," Henry insisted. "My part was just helping along its path." Instead, Marcus established a foundation to help homeless veterans, naming Henry as its first director. They opened a transitional housing facility with Duke as the official therapy dog, creating a place where former service members could rebuild their lives with dignity and support. 2 years later, Marcus owns a small construction company that employs several veterans from Henry's program. Emma attends a private preschool where she's learning to read and paint watercolor pictures of elephants. Their house has a big backyard where she plays with Duke on weekends, and a college fund that ensures she'll never have to count pennies in grocery stores. Every night before Emma goes to sleep, Marcus tells her the story of the magical penny and the kind man who gave it away. He explains that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the willingness to help others even when helping seems impossible. She listens with wide eyes, clutching Mr. Peanuts, and asking if Henry's grandfather is proud of them in heaven. Marcus always answers yes, because he believes with absolute certainty that some gifts are meant to travel through generations, gathering power and purpose until they land in exactly the right hands at exactly the right moment. Henry's penny didn't just change their financial circumstances. It restored Marcus's faith in the fundamental goodness of human nature and taught him that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is hope. The penny itself now sits in a frame on Marcus's desk, no longer worth nearly $1 million, but priceless in ways that auctions could never measure. Below it, a small plaque reads, "Given freely, received gratefully, shared generously." Emma likes to point at it and tell visitors about the day her daddy met an angel disguised as a homeless man who understood that true wealth means lifting others up when they're falling down. Comment, believe, if this story reminded you that miracles happen when we choose kindness over fear.